For most of his life, Wolfgang Van Halen has lived under a shadow, the kind cast by a legend. The son of guitar virtuoso Eddie Van Halen and actress Valerie Bertinelli, he grew up surrounded by fame, talent, and expectations he never asked for. But behind the smiles and the stage lights, his story has been one of loss, loneliness, and an uphill fight to prove that his name was more than an inheritance. What began as a childhood surrounded by music would become a lifelong test of identity and survival, the shadow and the spark. For Wolfgang Van Halen, music was never just a career choice. It was something in his DNA. But for most of his life, that gift came with a burden. Being the only son of Eddie Van Halen, one of the greatest guitarists who ever lived, meant living under constant comparison. From the moment he could walk, the world had already decided who he should become. But what no one saw was the quiet war inside him, a fight to be heard as his own person, not just a reflection of a legend. Born in 1991 to Eddie Van Halen and actress Valerie Bertinelli, Wolfgang entered a world of fame and noise that he didn't ask for. The cameras, the fans, the myth of Van Halen, all of it existed before he even understood what music really was. Yet inside his home, things were surprisingly ordinary. Valerie and Eddie wanted him to grow up grounded, not spoiled by celebrity. They didn't push him toward the stage or the studio. Instead, they gave him space to find himself. "My mom did a really good job at grounding me," he would later say. "It wasn't lavish or insane. It felt completely normal." Even in a household where rock stars dropped by like neighbors, Wolfgang's childhood wasn't glamorous. He spent more time with toys than instruments, more time with cartoons than guitars. To the outside world, he was destined to inherit his father's crown. But inside, he was just a shy, curious boy with a gentle streak, a kid who loved music but didn't yet realize it would define him. That innocence didn't last forever. One day, while exploring his father's collection, he stumbled across a stack of Van Halen records. The covers showed faces he didn't recognize, lights, crowds, and his father holding a guitar that seemed almost alive. "I saw my name on the box," he recalled years later, "and I asked my dad, 'What's this?' He said, 'Oh yeah, this is what I do.'" That moment, simple and quiet, shattered his world. The man who had taught him how to ride a bike wasn't just his father, he was a hero to millions. But that realization came with pressure. From then on, every note Wolfgang played would be measured against a legend. Every compliment would be followed by a comparison. He was both blessed and cursed by a name that carried history. Yet, even as a child, he seemed to understand that the only way forward was through authenticity. He didn't want to be the next Eddie Van Halen. He wanted to be the first Wolfgang Van Halen. In the years to come, that decision, to carve out his own identity while honoring his father's legacy, would shape everything: his music, his relationships, and the way he handled tragedy. Behind the success and the fame lay a story of quiet resilience, built not on privilege, but on perseverance. This is the story of how a boy born in the shadow of greatness learned to shine on his own terms. The boy who wasn't allowed to dream too loud. In the early 1990s, while the world still worshipped Eddie Van Halen as a guitar god, his son Wolfgang was learning about life far away from the chaos of the stage. His childhood was deliberately quiet, not the kind of childhood people expected from a rock star's son. Valerie Bertinelli wanted to shield him from the noise, the fame, and the temptations that had followed Eddie through decades of stardom. She filled their home not with luxury, but with warmth and structure. For all the guitars and gold records hanging on the walls, Wolfgang's early years were defined by routine: family dinners, homework, laughter, and the rare sound of silence. Eddie, on the other hand, tried to be a different kind of father than the world imagined. When he was home, he wasn't the wild, larger-than-life musician the public adored. He was gentle, patient, and often surprisingly shy. He encouraged Wolfgang's curiosity, but never forced him toward music. "He's the reason I do what I do," Wolfgang later said, "but he never told me what I had to be." That approach, half guidance, half freedom, planted the first seeds of independence in his son. It wasn't until Wolfgang was around 8 years old that music began to quietly take over his world. One day, his father handed him a pair of drumsticks and told him to start with the basics. No stage lights, no audience, just rhythm. Eddie didn't hand his son a guitar first because he didn't want him to imitate. He wanted him to understand timing, patience, and discipline. "He put a stack of magazines on the table," Wolfgang recalled. "He told me, if you can hit these in time, that's what playing drums is." It was the most unconventional music lesson imaginable, but it worked. The sound of sticks hitting paper filled the Van Halen home, and before long, Eddie rewarded his son with a small drum kit. What began as a playful experiment quickly became something serious. Wolfgang would disappear into his room for hours, pounding out rhythms until his hands hurt. His father would listen quietly from down the hall, a small smile forming on his face. Eddie didn't have to push. His son was pushing himself. By age 9, Wolfgang had developed real skill, even surprising Alex Van Halen, his uncle and drummer for the band. Still, for all his growing ability, Wolfgang's world remained small and innocent. He wasn't yet aware of the expectations waiting for him beyond those walls. When he visited his father's rehearsals, he thought the massive drum sets and guitars were just oversized toys. He didn't understand the weight of legacy, not yet. His parents made sure he could enjoy being a child before he became anything else. In that safe, protected space, the foundations of his character were built: humility, curiosity, and a quiet strength that would one day hold him up through unimaginable loss. What neither he nor his parents could have known then was that the rhythm he practiced as a boy, steady, patient, unbroken, would become the same rhythm that would carry him through the tragedies of his life and the storms of fame waiting just beyond the horizon. Learning the hard way. By the time Wolfgang reached his teenage years, the quiet rhythm of his childhood began to evolve into something much louder and far more complicated. After years behind the drum kit, he found himself drawn to the guitar. It was inevitable. After all, he lived in a house where some of the most revolutionary guitar riffs in rock history had been born. But for Wolfgang, this wasn't about copying his father. It was about curiosity, about figuring out how sound could tell a story. His father, Eddie, had changed the sound of rock forever, but he wasn't much of a teacher. He'd just say, "Do this," Wolfgang once recalled, and then play something only Eddie Van Halen could do. The gap between father and son wasn't emotional, it was technical. How do you teach someone genius? Eddie's talent was instinctive, not structured, and Wolfgang realized early that the only way to truly learn was to teach himself. He started from scratch, studying guitar tabs, listening to Blink-182 and System of a Down, and experimenting with melodies late at night when the house was quiet. It was during this time that Wolfgang began developing his own sound, one rooted in rhythm from his drumming days, but shaped by the angst of adolescence. He didn't want to imitate Van Halen's lightning-fast solos or stadium anthems. He wanted something raw, real, and modern. "It was important that I develop my own skills and my own sound," he told Spin. "Otherwise, you'd just be listening to some shoddy Van Halen cover band." That mindset, half defiance, half self-protection, became his artistic foundation. But while Wolfgang was finding his voice musically, he was also discovering what it meant to live in the public eye. The press loved to mention his lineage more than his progress. Every new photo or rumor came with the same label: Eddie Van Halen's son. Even before he'd stepped onto a stage, people had already decided who he was and who he wasn't. His mother, Valerie, shielded him as best she could, but she couldn't silence the noise. For a boy barely in high school, the world was already watching. Then came 2006, the year that would change everything. Eddie, whose health and personal life had been unstable for years, found renewed purpose in his son's talent. He invited Wolfgang to jam with him and his brother, Alex, the drummer for Van Halen. To everyone's surprise, the chemistry was real. Alex was floored when he learned that the powerful bass lines he heard through his headphones were being played by his own nephew. "That's Wolf?" he asked in disbelief. It wasn't just a proud family moment. It was the spark of something much bigger. When Eddie finally asked his 15-year-old son to officially join Van Halen as their new bassist, Wolfgang hesitated. He knew what people would say, that it was favoritism, not talent. Still, he agreed, under one humorous condition. "I'll do it, but I'm not doing any bass solos." It was a teenager's joke masking a man's fear. He was stepping into one of the most famous bands in the world, surrounded by critics who already doubted him. What followed, the 2007 to 2008 reunion tour with David Lee Roth, would test every ounce of his resolve and mark the beginning of his lifelong battle to prove that he wasn't just someone's son. He was an artist in his own right, and he was ready to earn that title the hard way. Learning the hard way. As Wolfgang grew, curiosity became obsession. By 12, he was experimenting with guitar, but not under his father's supervision. "My dad wasn't the best teacher," he later joked. "He'd just say, 'Do this,' and then play something insane." So Wolfgang decided to teach himself, determined to develop his own sound. He studied tabs from bands like System of a Down and Blink-182, refusing to be a clone of his father. "It was important that I develop my own skills and my own sound," he told Spin. "Otherwise, you'd just be listening to some shaky Van Halen cover band." By 2006, when he was just 15, Eddie made a decision that would thrust his son into the eye of the storm. He invited Wolfgang to join Van Halen as their new bassist, replacing longtime member Michael Anthony. For fans, it was scandalous, the ultimate act of nepotism. For Wolfgang, it was a trial by fire. He loved his father deeply, but the pressure was unbearable. "It was tough," he admitted. "I was there to support my dad, but I became the biggest enemy of every 40 to 50-year-old man out there." Every show, every note was a test of legitimacy. But Wolfgang proved himself. The 2007 to 2008 reunion tour with David Lee Roth silenced many critics, and even the band's 2012 album, A Different Kind of Truth, carried his fingerprints. Still, the hate left scars. "That did a lot of damage to me," he said years later. He wasn't just trying to make music, he was trying to survive it, breaking away. After years of touring, Wolfgang craved something of his own. In 2013, he joined Tremonti, the band formed by Creed's Mark Tremonti, not as Eddie Van Halen's son, but as a working musician. He recalled one wild moment when he joined them in New Jersey. "I went over one night at midnight and learned the entire set, and the next day we were on tour." He recorded 2 albums with them, Cauterize and Dust, balancing his dual life as a member of Van Halen and as a man seeking freedom from his last name. But fate wasn't kind. In 2020, tragedy struck. Eddie Van Halen's cancer, first diagnosed in 2001, returned with a vengeance. On October 6, 2020, the world lost one of its greatest guitarists. For Wolfgang, it was the day his world collapsed. "Some days are better than others," he told Carson Daly through tears. "It doesn't seem like the pain will ever go away." The grief nearly swallowed him. "I feel like crawling in a hole every day," he confessed, "but I know my dad would be really pissed off at me if I did." In the months that followed, Wolfgang poured that pain into music. Every chord was a conversation with a ghost. The weight of a legacy. In 2021, Wolfgang released his debut album, Mammoth WVH. The title carried deep meaning. Mammoth had been the original name of his father's first band, years before Van Halen existed. This was Wolfgang's way of reclaiming the past while defining his future. Every instrument on the album, drums, bass, guitar, vocals, was performed by him alone. "It's 100% all me," he told NPR. "It's more pressure, but it's creatively freeing." The album's lead single, Distance, written in memory of his father, became a #1 hit on Billboard's hard rock chart and earned him a Grammy nomination for Best Rock Song. It was his first solo release and his first taste of validation. "We came, we saw, but we did not conquer," he joked on Instagram, posing with his mother Valerie and girlfriend Andrea Alsop at the 2022 Grammys. But the emotion ran deeper than humor. Eddie hadn't won a Grammy on his first try either. "I guess I'm following in his footsteps," Wolfgang said quietly. That same year, he took Mammoth WVH on tour, stepping into the spotlight not as a bassist, but as a frontman. It terrified him. "I was sitting in the dressing room thinking, I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. Yet the moment he stepped on stage, everything changed. For the first time, he wasn't playing his father's songs, he was playing his own. A new life, a new name. In 2023, Wolfgang's world shifted again. After 8 years of dating, he married photographer Andrea Alsop at their Los Angeles home, surrounded by 90 friends and family. During the ceremony, a recording of Eddie Van Halen's instrumental 316, the song he'd written for Wolfgang's birth, played as the groom and his mother walked down the aisle. "It was a way to include my dad," Wolfgang said softly. Valerie Bertinelli, glowing with pride, told people, "They really get each other. They're so comfortable together." That same year, Wolfgang released his second album, Mammoth 2, again playing every instrument himself. His confidence had grown, but humility never left. "Luckily, people are starting to become fans of the music first, and only then realize who my dad was," he told Guitar.com. In March 2024, he made headlines again, this time at the Oscars, performing I'm Just Ken alongside Ryan Gosling and Slash. "Right when Ryan whips out his abs, there's a guitar-tapping solo," he laughed. "And that's me." "It was surreal," he admitted. "Not my normal place to hang around. I felt like a fish out of water, but for a moment, the world saw him for what he truly was, a musician, not a shadow." Wolfgang Van Halen's journey has been long, painful, and full of quiet victories. He's not just carrying his father's name, he's redefining it. From the little boy drumming on magazines to a man who built an entire sound on his own, Wolfgang has become proof that grief can turn into greatness. Do you think he's finally stepped out from his father's shadow? Tell us what you think in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.